When I was thinking about this talk, I had a main objective, and this was to allow myself to do some big, bold, imaginative, ambitious thinking while making absolutely sure that there was no way in which I could be construed as saying something like, "Humans of the world, relax. I know you've spent the last 5,000 years struggling with various intractable and complex problems, but it's okay, because experimental theatre's here now, and everything's going to be fine." So if I do say that, or if I intimate or hint at that, you have my full permission to throw your chairs or that iPad at me, because it will be deserved. So having dismissed how theatre can definitely save the world from my first draft, I moved on to, can theatre actually change anything at all? And this question, I think, is much more interesting. And it's right at the heart of the work that Coney make. Because as well as making work which puts the audience in control and gives them agency over the outcome, we also want to make work that's meaningful, work that actually changes the world. Now, we do this in lots of different ways. We make projects in schools called Adventures in Learning, and the ambition here is to inspire children through storytelling and adventures and parcels arriving in a classroom, inspiring them to engage with normal learning in a different way. We also apparently have a vague link to a strange organization that resembles a playful secret agency. Now, if this secret agency did exist, and it definitely doesn't, but if it did, part of its secret manifesto would be to change the world for the better, one person at a time. Now, as I'll talk about in a moment, our larger scale, more theatrical pieces also have this ambition for change right at their heart. But we're not that great innovators, because it goes right back to the very start. The very first Athenian political satires, 2,500 years ago, they were political. Likewise, Shakespeare, he was forever lampooning various monarchs and things like that. So it's not new, and governments have for a long time respected and feared theatre's ability to engage, inspire, and change the mind of its audience. Now, in 20th century Czechoslovakia, the plays of Václav Havel were banned. So they were distributed among the people in something called samizdat form, and I apologize to any Czech people who I've mispronounced that about. But samizdat means that the plays were hand-copied by people and supporters of Václav Havel and passed among the population. They were then performed in secret as well. And through the spread of these plays and this dissemination, Václav Havel gained momentum towards ultimately leading the Velvet Revolution. So these plays, I think, tangibly played a role in Václav Havel capturing the imagination of a nation and leading the revolution. Although, I think he was helped by the fact that he looked so impossibly cool. Next slide. Oh, there he is. I mean, there's Václav Havel looking impossibly cool. Now, Václav is cited as by a company called Belarus Free Theatre as a key influence. And they are making work today. And the heroic work that they're making shows that theatre as an act of political protest didn't disappear along with the Soviet Union. And all of this got me thinking, because there's always been other ways to get your point across and to spread the word, possibly more efficient ways. So why has theatre as an agent of change persisted? Now, I've spoken to quite a lot of different people about this, and in different ways, almost all of them have said to me that the live event has an ineffable, almost hypnotic power. It's almost as if the suspension of disbelief that you need to really believe that two actors on a stage are real people takes your imagination into a place where it's receptive to new, exciting, and possibly dangerous ideas. Dear old Václav himself said that theatre offers a kind of immediate and vivid enactment of the very mystery of human existence. However, theatre is still often accused of being irrelevant, and sometimes it's fair enough. About 10 years ago, during the build-up to the Iraq War, I went to see lots of plays in London that were critiquing and very anti the Iraq War. So, and as I was, the whole audience was against the Iraq War. So this was a play saying the Iraq War is bad. The audience was going, the Iraq War is bad. So we all left that night feeling really great because our opinions had been confirmed by what we'd seen. But they hadn't been challenged, and the world, the outside world, outside of that little theatre, was totally unchanged. Nowadays, if you want to reach a really diverse audience, you might do a TV documentary or run a blog or use Twitter. And of course, during the Arab Spring, we saw the power of Twitter to actually make a change. And so this made me think about what it was that I'm actually doing, because why does Coney use theatre rather than these other mediums? And I guess we do use the other mediums, but we're a theatre company that tweets rather than a Twitter company that theatres. But I think one of the reasons is what Vaclav says, the power of live performance. But the other is the specific type of work we make. We make work in which the audience is the leading role. They are in control. We make worlds where the audience has agency over how the story ends. So every time the show plays out, there's a different audience making different decisions, and the show ends a different way. This allows us to make almost modeled worlds which the audience enter when the show begins. And inside those worlds, we can try things out. We can throw in curveballs and almost actually run little games and models of situations. This allows us to, rather than just talking about a complex issue, we can let the audience experience it for themselves. Our current new play is a piece called Early Days of a Better Nation. There we are, that was good. And Early Days of a Better Nation casts the audience as a government of a country that's just gained its independence and broken free from some terrible oppressor. And their challenge, there's 120 people who's the parliament, and their challenge is to steer the nation through its tricky early days. Now, when we first put this show on, we gave the audience an open invitation to compose a constitution. And what they came up with was lovely, but it was kind of a hippie-ish utopia where everyone had free housing, free healthcare, free education, and free ice cream. And it was great, but it wasn't really realistic. So what we did was devise an economy and pop that into the world we'd made. So now the audience had to pay for their lovely policies. And obviously there wasn't enough money in the system to pay for everything. And then we began to model and mirror the realities of running a country and the realities of running a government. So as well as modeling these larger scale scenarios, we also give individuals the opportunity to try on a different hat, to try on a different pair of trousers and become somebody else for a moment. Sometimes this can be quite pantomime-y as we give someone a very clear instruction to be an absolute villain and to go out and wreak havoc. But sometimes it's more subtle, and we challenge people to take on the character of someone who believes the absolute opposite to them on an issue. Now, that's interesting, but you're probably thinking that you might find that difficult, being in a room full of people having to play out a worldview that you disagree with, or that might even be controversial. And so in order to make the audience comfortable and to the audience to come with us on that journey, we untether the work from the real world. We remove its links and references to actual historical events. Annette, who's my co-director of Coney, says that we use a kind of fable quality to our work, whereas Tassos, who's our third co-director, talks about a lightness of touch. And this means that there's humor constantly threaded throughout. So there's a sort of a little wink that it's not that serious, it's not real, so it's okay to go to interesting places. And we actually think that by making our shows clearly not real, we increase their potential to have impact on the real world. This is because as people lose their inhibitions, they start to act with instinctive imagination. They lose themselves in play. And play is powerful. We're talking about the sort of primeval play here, the play that you see with lion cubs when they're fighting but learning really important things. So we want to create a playground with our shows that lets the audience experiment with totally new and outlandish ways of behaving, but ultimately they know that it's okay, that the only way to get hurt is if you trip over a stray lighting cable. So we've seen some real changes in our audience. We talked to them afterwards, and they surprised themselves. Someone who's quiet becomes a revolutionary. Someone who's incredibly good becomes mischievous or devious or Machiavellian. And those insights we think are valuable and have a real potential to be used for change. We also see interesting shifts in how a group of strangers, which is what an audience is at the start, become a community. Bonds spring up. And this seems to be more than in a normal theatre show when audience interaction with each other might be sort of a shush of a rogue sweet rustler or something like that. So we see from the passionate conversations that spring up between our audience members and the passionate romances that occasionally spring up between them also, that this type of work gives people a bond because they've made something together and they've shared something unique which they've created. It means something. And so we've tried to peel that thinking back a stage. And on a show that we made in Cumbria last year, we invited the whole community into the process from the very start. We cast an entire cast, apart from 3 professionals, of local people aged between 16 and 74. And a majority of these people were making their theatre debut, including this lady who's Elaine, and she was 74, and that was the first time she'd ever been on stage, and she was magnificent. But as well as giving the people that experience to be in the show, we went wider. We went out into the community, and we found out the stories from people. We found out the historical clashes and the difficulties and the rivalries, and we built those into the show because we recognized that we're from London and West Cumbria is far away, and these were the experts, and we wanted that piece to be authentic. One of the people we spoke to was a lady called Sally Jones, and Sally was about 70, and she had formerly worked in a factory called Edgard's, and they made military clothing. And Sally was a teenager, and she worked on the floor along with about 150 other girls. Their boss was the personnel manager called Mrs. Eve Ross, and Mrs. Ross sounded amazing. She was austere but stylish, and she was very, very stern, but clearly was also a surrogate mother to all of these girls. Now, Sally spoke with great passion about Mrs. Ross, and we decided to resurrect her in the play. And when we auditioned for the professional actress to play Mrs. Ross, Sally was there with me. She was sort of very carefully analysing each actress for their essential Mrs. Rossishness, and then really it was her decision on who we chose. And then once we had chosen someone, Sally went off with the actress and taught her the walk, taught her the voice, the dress sense. We went through different costumes and really made that character. Sally Jones was not in Let Them Eat Jam, but she was one of the most important parts. And the name Let Them Eat Jam comes from a rivalry between the towns of Workington and Whitehaven in West Cumbria, where both call each other jam eaters. You'll have to Google that to find out where jam eating comes from. But we think the fact that we gave the audience the input, we gave the community the input into the content, what that play discussed, we hope, was relevant to them because they made it happen. Now, there's a theatre company which I'm not a part of called Glass Performance, and they're based in Glasgow. And they're taking this to the next level. They are working on a street called Albert Drive in Glasgow. And this street is 1.5 miles long, and it runs all the way from Pollokshields right up to the top. And it has a range of different communities on it. On one end, you have very poor communities, lots of social and economic problems. Right on the other end, you have the mansions of millionaires. In between, there are 5 different religious communities and 7 first languages spoken. So it's a very diverse area, but it's also quite isolated from each other. These communities exist in isolation. Now, what Tashi Gore and her team with Glass Performance are trying to do is make a piece of theatre and a whole range of artistic events, which every part of that community, everyone along Albert Drive, has contributed to. The piece launched with an amazing show or walk, which took its journey from one end of the road to the other, with the audience visiting and popping in for cups of tea at different households along the way. They're currently in the process of doing something amazing, which is building a full-size glass house in the middle of the street. And this is going to be called Everybody's House. And it's a brand new space with no history and no brick walls, so you can see what's going on. And all of the different communities are being invited into that house to do different artistic and creative projects which build these links, which build these connections. And I think only theatre and art can really do this kind of thing. I think a council would find it tricky to get approval for an idea to build a full-size, entirely glass house in the middle of a road. But theatre can take that chance, can try something outlandish, but something that might just work and might solve a mainstream problem. So, theatre is not going to save the world tomorrow. But I do believe that it can change the world by changing people. It can change by being an act of protest in itself. It can change by allowing people to try on new hats, to explore different perspectives and worldviews. But perhaps most powerfully, it can change by giving someone the chance to create something valuable with someone else. And when you've made something with someone else, you've got something in common with them, something to talk about over a cup of tea. And that's a start. Thank you.